let me Okay, there we go. All right. So thank you for that introduction and for reading my a bit outdated bio from the website. And thank you again for letting me join. And then Annie, thank you for kind of giving us a background on this workshop. And so this is kind of the overview of what we'll talk about. And we kind of have record timing on everything. So we're going to, like I said, breeze through some of this. And so some of it, we can, we'll definitely be sharing resources and links like that after the presentation as well. So don't feel like you have to take a million notes or write everything down super fast. I'll be sure to share everything we cover here. And so basically just a little bit of background. I am the Healthy Homes Program Manager at Women for a Healthy Environment. We are a local environmental health, public health nonprofit located right here in the city of Pittsburgh. Our office is right in East Liberty, actually. And so we are at the cornerstone of how the built environment impacts health with an emphasis on families and children's health. And so we have three main program areas, and that's our Healthy Early Learning program that's focused on, the early learning setting and like daycares. And then we have our Healthy Homes program, which I'm the manager of. And then we also have a Healthy Schools program. And embedded into each of these programs is also an emphasis around community health and recognizing environmental justice areas. And so really prioritizing our outreach and our initiatives and our resources in areas that are impacted by environmental health hazards disproportionately. And so that's kind of us in a very, very brief nutshell. And we've been around for around 10 years doing this work. And so I'm really excited to be here to kind of shed light on a few environmental health hazards that we talk very specifically about in our home setting. And so this is a lot of words to just say that housing is important and a part of our health, and it impacts our health outcomes, our ability to learn and thrive, and in any condition. And so that's really why we talk about this at the intersection of health, especially, in the last 18 months, seeing how important it is to have a healthy home environment when you're stuck in your home all the time. And so, like I said, it's kind of a lot of words to just say that there are linkages between lead poisoning, asthma, respiratory illnesses, and chronic diseases that are linked to things like poor air quality, lead in the drinking water and lead in the paint, and inadequate ventilation, pest infestations, different things like that that can really impact the health and safety of our home environment, and that will have long-term impacts on our health outcomes. And so what does that look like? Well, I said a lot of words to say that there's a lot of things we want to keep in mind when we think of a healthy home. And so I put quotations around that because that's a loose term. And that's a term that we can create, on our own. But there are principles that we use to guide that. And that's keeping a home dry, clean, pest-free, safe, contaminant-free, ventilated, maintained, and thermally controlled. And so what that kind of relays and what we'll talk about tonight is we're going to talk very briefly around lead, mold, and radon, and then dive a little bit deeper into the indoor air quality aspects of green cleaning and personal care products. But all of this is super important and super critical to creating and maintaining a healthy home. And so I preface all of this by saying that if you do rent in the state of Pennsylvania, there are certain laws and protections. And so I don't ever assume that people rent or own. I rent right in the city of Pittsburgh. And so whenever I started out this job and was recognizing and identifying resources for both homeowners and renters, we stumbled upon, and in partnership with local legal aid networks, we're able to put together basically like a renter's guide. And so this is available on our website. I will just kind of drill this down into like a one-sentence spiel to just basically say that through what's called the implied warranty of habitability and repairs, and that is inherently written into any lease in the state of Pennsylvania, you are entitled to a safe and habitable house and living situation. And so there is some caveats to that, obviously, but you are entitled to a safe and healthy living space. And what that looks like can be different based on the situation you're in. And if you or anybody who's in a situation where they may be dealing with a property or a unit that is deteriorating or in not the best condition, and there are things that are deemed unhealthy or unsafe, there are different protocols in place that we can help people get connected to those resources. Specifically, we work with Community Justice Project, which is a nationwide legal aid network, but we work specifically with the Pittsburgh reps here. So we're gonna, like I said, breeze through these first couple and then dive a little bit deeper into the green cleaning and personal care product safety portion of this, Healthy Homes workshop. But, we all live in Allegheny County or nearby in the Western PA region. And we all deal with deteriorating and old infrastructure. And so over 80% of the homes built in Allegheny County were built before 1978. And that's this magic number specifically for lead and lead in paint, because that is when lead was removed from residential paint use. And so that's kind of the magic number we use to determine lead poisoning risk, especially in housing. And so many of us know or have heard of lead, specifically probably when it comes to drinking water, but lead in a bunch of words is just a neurotoxin that is harmful to health, specifically around children's health. That's where we see the most long-term impacts around things like behavioral damage, permanent cognitive damage as well. So basically linking to things like ADD, ADHD, behavior issues down the line, and even some linkage to chronic disease. And so we talk about lead as a whole, knowing that there is, the greatest impact and the greatest harm on children under the age of 6, specifically because that's when, they're doing the things we want them to do. They're exploring their spaces, but they're also eating, drinking, and breathing more air and food and water, and also exploring their spaces and putting their hands in their mouths and picking up dirt and exploring that and putting that in their mouths. And so they're at a higher risk for all these exposures, specifically paint and dust in those older homes. And so we think about lead across paint, dust, water, and soil as the primary routes of exposure. I'll cover there are a lot of resources right now in Allegheny County for lead. We have limited time, so I'm going to breeze through this part, but this is also available on our website. We currently right now have a public awareness campaign around lead exposure, specifically in Allegheny County, that's called Get the Lead Out. And we have one that's specific to the city of Pittsburgh, as well as different initiatives happening throughout the county. But this is 10 things you can think about. Many of them we've probably heard of, but the big ones are, maintaining that paint where it's chipping and peeling, filtering your water, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, and then other things, specifically getting your spaces tested. So I'll plug at the end, we do right now have different resources for free lead testing as well. And so I think, mainly many of us can know or can relate to lead in some capacity, but most of us, the first thing that comes to our mind is the drinking water. And so if you are within the Wilkinsburg-Penn Joint Water Authority, right now, in a lot of words, they basically got a lot of money to do what PWSA did over the last few years, and that's to start replacing their lead service lines. And so through that money, it's called PennVest dollars. That's through the state. They were awarded. It's basically grant funding to do that work. And so through that, we are kind of asking and hoping that that the Water Authority can prioritize the areas that are being impacted by lead poisoning at higher rates. And so that's those bolded areas within the service area, Turtle Creek being a part of that, but also these other municipalities as well. And then different pockets of, Braddock, there's only service by the 4th Ward, the rest of it's the Braddock Water Authority, also different pockets of the other municipalities listed there as well. So this is just kind of, relevant to people in this service area. All of that to say there's a lot of money to do this lead service line replacement, which is really great. We are just asking that they do it in an equitable way with some community input, create some community feedback and advisory structure to this. And so all that to say that we do right now have a petition for the Wilkinsburg-Penn Joint Water Authority. I'll be sure to put this in the chat at the end, basically asking for all those things that I just included here. So if you live in the service area, I'll be sure to put that link in the chat. And if you have any questions around this, I'll be sure to answer this after. I don't want to spend too much time on that. Okay, so the rest of this, we're going to talk more specifically about the different environmental hazards that can impact our indoor air specifically. And so when we talk about indoor air, it's pretty self-explanatory in the sense that it refers to the air quality within and around the buildings and structures, especially as it relates to the health and comfort of the building occupants and the residents in those homes. And so in order to deal with our indoor air quality, we have to understand what impacts it and the common pollutants that we can address within our home. And so that typically is related, the impacts of indoor air pollution is related to things that we see specifically around respiratory illnesses. And if you're someone or related to anybody in your family or live with someone that deals with any type of respiratory or chronic disease, so asthma, COPD, chronic respiratory illness, different things like that, where we know that the indoor air quality is crucial to keeping that person and that individual healthy in their home. And so, these are different point source solutions that we can think of both inside and outside the home that can still have impacts in air quality, both inside and outside the home again. And so more of those inside ones that we talk about are things like radon and pesticides and how we deal with pests in our home, different things like the varnishes and paints that we use or the furniture that we use in our home. So that more building material specific space. And then there are some of that more outdoor specific point source solutions. So those industrial point source solutions, some of those, fuel burning, different things like that, tobacco products, both inside and outside the home. And so the outdoor air quality can impact our indoor air quality, but we can do a lot in the inside of our home to really improve our indoor air quality regardless. And so we'll talk a little bit more specifically about that, but I just wanted to include that these are the most common pollutant sources specifically for indoor air quality here. And so this is all this to say that over 90% of the day is spent at home, in a building or in a school or at work in some type of indoor capacity. That looks a little bit different, obviously, in the last 18 months, but that's a lot of our time. And so it's important to be thinking about, what's in those environments and how we're maintaining them and how we're addressing those different pollutants and how we can really, make some change in our home environment on an individual level while also advocating and pushing for bigger policy initiatives and policy change. So what I had mentioned earlier was radon. And so that's one of the actually number one cause of lung cancer in non-smokers, specifically here in PA, we deal with radon because it is a naturally occurring gas. So it forms, underground, and it's a radioactive metal that breaks down in the rocks, soil, and in the groundwater. So if you've ever bought a home, that typically, except for in the last few months, now that the housing stock has been a little bit crazy, but you typically have to test for radon at a point of sale. So I'm sure at some point you or someone has tested their home for radon. And what is considered to be above an action level is that 4 picoliters per liter. And that is basically just determined through the federal government as being, kind of an action level, but you want that number to be as low as possible either way. And so once you get above 4, that's when you would get what's called a radon reduction system. So many homes, especially in Allegheny County, have some type of system like this specifically in the basement. So you test for radon. You should test for radon annually. January is actually Radon Action Month. And so most people test once and they're like, oh, nope, I'm good. Don't have to worry about that. Well, we all know that the ground moves and the earth kind of shifts a little bit. And so those radon levels can change, honestly, even day to day. And so it really is important to check annually. We are in what is called, we are in what is in the national average. We are above the national average, specifically in Allegheny County compared to both the state and national average for radon levels. So through the American Lung Association, we actually have a program where you can get a free radon test. In that link I'll include as well. And so if you don't want to go through the ALA, you can get them at any big box store. You can get them at Home Depot, Lowe's, anything like that. They're typically only from like 15 to 20 bucks if you get the small carbon activated ones. Super easy to test. You usually just send them off to a lab that's included in your test kit. You get those levels back. And if you're above that 4, that's when you would put in something like this. That's a radon reduction system. So any questions around that, we can definitely add those either to the chat or at the end. But the next thing, and all of us deal with this, and especially if we have any type of basement that collects even the smallest amount of water, or maybe a bathroom that doesn't have a fan, we all deal with mold in some capacity. We know what that is. And it's basically it's a fungus that can be found indoors and outdoors, but they thrive in damp conditions in those high moisture areas. And so like I mentioned, that's usually in things around bathrooms, basements, anywhere where there's, anywhere where moisture can accumulate. And so there's different ways that we can deal with mold, and there's different there's different resources for that. Typically, what the biggest one and what we can do that will see the longest impact is really where you can controlling that moisture. And so in basements, getting dehumidifiers, in bathrooms, making sure that you're getting that airflow in, especially during or after you've had your hot water going for a really long time. And really that's like where we see mold, making sure that we're removing it as quickly as we can and as efficiently as we can. And many times, the go-to is just to dump a bunch of bleach on mold, which can in some capacity and in some ways be helpful, but it actually is more helpful and a more long-term solution to actually physically remove mold with hot water and soap. And that will actually pick up and remove the mold spores rather than just killing them and leaving them on the surface where they can eventually, if you didn't kill them all, just stay there. And so, utilizing really elbow grease and hot soap and water and thinking about some of those kind of more old school ways that people dealt with cleaning bathrooms and cleaning spaces is super helpful, specifically around mold in bathrooms. And so questions around that, we have a whole fact sheet on mold that we put together that's also available on our website. I'm sorry I'm breezing through a lot of these. We've got a lot to get through. And lastly, before we dive deep into the green cleaning space, I do want to mention, pests are something that we all deal with. A recent study showed that 75% of US households use at least one pesticide product indoors in the past year. And, pesticides can be really good at, killing pests, but they're also super harmful to both humans and to if you have pets or anything like that in your home as well. And so they're meant to kill in some capacity, and they're meant to reduce those pests in a way that can be super helpful, but can also be super harmful for the people living in those spaces. So we all deal with them in some capacity. There's a lot of proactive ways that we can deal with pests, and that's doing things like keeping clutter at bay where we can, keeping our counters, sinks, and tables clean. And so getting rid of any crumbs, sweeping those up, wiping those down as quickly as we can. Sealing cracks and openings, specifically around where you store food, is super helpful. And then, where you can, if you are dealing with, cockroaches or mice or anything like that, what is super impactful and a really great tool is using what's basically just like glue-based traps. So they don't have a bait, they don't have anything like that in them, so they're non-toxic, and they are super helpful, especially if you leave them around where you might be dealing with, there's that one crack that they're coming in through. If you leave those traps right near those cracks, it really is a super efficient way to deal with pests. And I will say that if that is kind of your, those are your big spots, you see really big openings or even just small openings, but you maybe don't have the capacity or the time or the money to seal those off or find somebody who can do that. What is also actually really helpful and a really cheap way to kind of keep your problem at bay for a little bit is steel wool. Most rodents can't chew through steel wool. So if you do have a hole that's, from your basement to your living room or from the outside to the inside, and that that's your problem area, that's a really good temporary fix until you can really go in and seal off those holes. And so a lot of ways that you can be proactive in pest management that can kind of help you avoid ever having to use pesticides. And I will say, when you do get to that point, if you do need to, think about some pesticides and things like that, be sure that you do follow all the label instructions. They're there for a very good reason. Like I mentioned, they are toxic, not only to what they're trying to kill, but also to pests, or also to people and to pets and anybody living in that space. Specifically, if they do have any type of respiratory condition, it can be a very big trigger for anybody with asthma or COPD or anything like that. So we work very closely with the Penn State University. They have a pest management program through there. So they have a lot of great resources that we point people to if there's one specific pest that you really can't, you really can't get or really can't deal with. We'll be sure to get you connected. Okay, so this is where we're going to spend the rest of our time for the most part talking about personal care product safety, cleaning products, and the impact that has on our health, and the resources that we know of and that we've been using that really help consumers make informed decisions. And so we had talked about indoor air quality already and how it contributes to overall health, and specifically those respiratory illnesses like asthma and different respiratory or in different chronic diseases as well. And so the health impacts of, bad indoor air quality, we've already talked about this. That's things like, I'm sure if you've had a weird smell in your home, I'm just thinking, we can also like feel the smell of bleach in our throat. Like that's my like best kind of example that I can give for that. Or like ammonia. If you ever remember like waking up on a Saturday morning, you're like, oh, my mom's mopping, like you can feel that in your throat. Those have really high, what we call volatile organic compounds. We'll talk about that in the next slide. And then some of those, so those are short-term, itchy throat, runny nose, itchy eyes, that kind of thing. And then there's more long-term impacts, can be linkages to things like respiratory diseases and even some cancers as well. And so, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit more specifically around green cleaning right now. And so many of the time when we're talking about cleaning products and the impact that that has on our health, that's in different ways. So both at acute, like I talked about, those, respiratory irritants, that kind of thing, and then also in chronic health problems. And so specifically when we're talking about green cleaning, we're really linking that to what's called volatile organic compounds. And those are in products that can affect the indoor air quality and can also affect outdoor air quality in the terms of smog formation as well. And so volatile organic compounds, which we call VOCs for short, are emitted gases from certain solids or liquids. And so typically that is through the liquids in our in our cleaning products, but can be found in other things like in a variety of chemicals through like varnishes or paints or different things like that. So they're emitted through kind of this wide array of products in thousands of different materials, products, paints, varnishes, that kind of stuff. And so they're widely used in household products. These products can release organic compounds. And so while you're using them, you can see spikes in those in your indoor air quality, specifically around anything that's in like an aerosol, anything that has what is typically like a bleach-based or a chlorine-based product, those types of things where you can really see and honestly smell the spikes in VOCs. And so that's what we're really talking about most of the time when we're talking about cleaning products. Cosmetics and personal care products are a little bit different. We're not really linking cleaning products to any specific carcinogen or any specific health outcome, just because it is so varied and impacts can be so, it's hard to measure basically. But when we're talking about cleaning, we are pretty much for the most part talking about VOCs and the impact on indoor air quality and how that is typically a respiratory irritant. When we're talking about personal care products, it's a little bit different. And so that was a lot of words right there. And so I'll basically wrap that up by just saying that the alternative to using some of those products is implementing something called green cleaning. And so using green cleaning, that's, thinking about the products that we have in our home, thinking about less toxic or different ways that we can do that same process or get that same level of cleanliness, but in a safer way. And so, that's really aimed at reducing human health and environmental concerns that are associated with cleaning and utilizing safer cleaning and disinfecting that are also, effective and efficient. We don't want to tell you to go take a bucket of vinegar and, have your best at it and hope it goes well. We really want to be sure that we're giving people the tools to see the same results they would see with the product that they've typically used or have used in the past that's been really effective and really efficient at, making those spaces clean. And so really implementing safer ways of cleaning, but keeping them just as efficient and as effective as if you were using the products that you might typically use. And so we'll talk a little bit more about personal care product safety before we dive into the resources for this. And so really this is just to say that in the United States, we kind of have a backward system about how we regulate and oversee what's on our shelves. And so there can be over 40,000 chemicals used in our homes through the different products that we have. And of those, this number might be a little bit different now, but maybe only slightly. Of those, only about 200, maybe 250 are tested for safety. And of those, I believe this number is now 14. I should have updated this slide. Only about 14 have been banned. And so that ratio is definitely a little bit concerning. And it's definitely not the standard across the board. And so in Europe, there's a much different standard and a much tighter and stricter regulation for what's allowed to be on the shelves, specifically when it's been tested for safety. And so we don't have that here in the United States. Cosmetic is intentionally written as a vague term. And that really gives many manufacturers a lot of freedom, which in some ways is great, and in some ways can be a little concerning, especially if we don't know the impact that some of the products and chemicals have on human health and on human safety. So I'm not going to read through all of these, and this is honestly a very short list compared to what a lot of the national research shows. And so we've just pulled a few that many people have heard of, and that's things like parabens, phthalates, which honestly many of us have probably seen in the last few years, specifically as seeing things marketed as being paraben and phthalate free. And that's because they are known endocrine disruptors. And so when we're talking about personal care products or even chemicals in general, we kind of break them down into like 3 buckets, and that's being endocrine disrupting chemicals, asthma, irritants, so respiratory irritants, and then carcinogens, so known cancer causing agents. And so these endocrine disruptors are unique in the sense that, they are synthetically made. And so they kind of trick our body into responding to, what it recognizes as being hormones that are actually just synthetically made chemicals and can cause different things. And so, endocrine disrupting chemicals have been linked to things like hormone disruption, early puberty, can impact reproductive development and fertility. And so it's really kind of this wide array of the impacts that these what's called endocrine disrupting chemicals, which is a really vague term for a lot of chemicals. It's really it's really right now kind of vague on what that impact looks like, but it really is focused on basically those synthetic chemicals kind of creating a response in our body that would typically happen to a naturally occurring hormone, but at a different rate at a different time than what our naturally occurring hormones would be causing. And so that more second part of it, in terms of, respiratory irritants, that's when we'll talk more specifically about those cleaning products. And so again, I won't go through each of these, but that last one I do want to just kind of put a plug out for is fragrance. And so there are specific slides for that, but I will just say that fragrance is in everything, and there are some pretty big loopholes around fragrance. And so we'll talk about those specifically in a few slides. So these few chemicals are specific to cleaning products, like I had mentioned, and many of these, as you see, are mostly linked to irritants, respiratory irritants, eye irritants, skin irritants, anything along those lines. But I will say that formaldehyde was on both lists. And so it was on the first list around that was specific to personal care product safety, as it was actually typically used in nail polishes for a really long time. And then even in this space here, as not so much cleaning products, although it was used for in some detergents, specifically in powdered detergents for many years, but not so much recently, according to many studies, but was used a lot in glues and in making things in what is commonly referred to as flame retardants. And so making those different furnitures and those different floorings, that kinds of stuff, making those obviously, less prone to fire hazards. And so that was a common ingredient in most, common chemical in most flame retardants that was actually linked to cancer. And so that's one of the only things that you'll see that is a known carcinogen. Many of these other things are endocrine disruptors or respiratory or any type of allergy or asthmagen, because there can't be it's hard to make a direct linkage to cancer in a lot of ways. And so we can say that it has been can be something that impacts cancer risk or something along those lines, but those direct linkages are hard to make sometimes. But formaldehyde is the one that we see on both lists that is the known carcinogen. And then this is just a list of very specific endocrine disruptors that we've seen across the board. And so that's in things like, honestly, even in our cookware. And so what makes things nonstick, we think about endocrine disrupting chemicals, as well as what we call, and you'll see those here down at the bottom, PFAS chemicals. And so basically the lining that's made to make things nonstick, when those are no longer, that last one there, the perfluorochemicals, when those are disrupted and those are disturbed. So basically when you start seeing nicks and some scratches and things like that in your nonstick cookware, it's time to toss that out, because those exposures to those PFAS chemicals can highly increase whenever you put high heat to those, especially when they're no longer intact. And so don't go throw away all your cookware. That's crazy. But if you do start to see some cuts, some scrapes, some nicks in your if you have anything that's nonstick, it might be time to, maybe replace that out for maybe stainless steel or something along those lines. Cast iron is always a good one too. But this is a pretty extensive list across not just personal care products, but across the board. And so you see things like BPA-free plastic, BPS-free plastic, different things along those lines as well. Again, I'll make sure I share all of these with you. This is a lot of information to cover in a very short amount of time, and I'm barely touching the surface. And so I will just say that, there's a lot of reasons why we're kind of in this space where we don't really have a consumer-friendly market. And one of those, like I had already mentioned, is being, that intentional vagueness around what's determined a cosmetic and what's regulated by the FDA, specifically loopholes in ingredient disclosure. And so not having to disclose certain things. One of those being fragrance. And so like I had mentioned, fragrance is something that is intentionally vague. That's in the next slide. And then that middle term there is something that, thank goodness, we don't see as much anymore, but definitely can. But, in like the early 2010s, whenever companies were trying to make that switch into being eco and green, and maybe their marketing and their bottles and the way that they presented their materials didn't actually translate to what they were actually including in their ingredients. And so making their labels look like they were green and eco-healthy and they were sustainably made. And then if you flip the bottle over, that was not really relayed. And so I will say that what I commonly say in these kinds of workshops is that none of us are going to leave this and throw everything away, because this is a lot of information, and that would be crazy to go into our medicine cabinets and into our underneath our sinks and into our bathrooms and throw everything away. That is definitely not what we're going to do today. What we will do though is we'll kind of leave with some next steps. We'll leave resources on what we can do, some of those small changes. If your dish soap's out, we can help you, maybe find a new one, and maybe one that is a little bit safer, or maybe one that might be a better fit for you. Same with different personal care products. And so if your shampoo's out, maybe we can help you find a different one. And so all of that to say that, we don't want to leave here and be like, oh my God, everything's bad, because that's not the case. And we just want to be a resource. And so what I will say though, is that when it comes to the way that things are marketed, the only thing that is technically certified organic in the United States is your meat. And so beyond that, when something's being marketed as organic or eco-healthy or sustainably made, there's not really a federal, certification or a federal regulation that meets. What I will say is that national foundations and national certification programs have definitely filled the gap in that space in a lot of ways. And so we'll highlight a resource in that way here in a minute. So I just want to kind of flag what I had already talked about with fragrance, is that is vaguely defined by the FDA as a combination of chemicals that gives each perfume or cologne its distinct scent. And so that is super vague, and honestly is written that way for business trade reasons. And so basically you don't have to disclose what is in fragrance, because that is technically part of your business, and you don't have to do that. And so that is not a consumer friendly way to run a business, but it is in some sense, it's being protective of the ingredients you use and the way that you've created a certain smell, and so that it can't be replicated in other ways. And so it's not a consumer friendly way to go about it, but it is definitely one to protect the manufacturer and the business on that front. And so I will just say that fragrance can be a combination of over 3,000 different chemicals, and over 90% of those are synthetically made, meaning that it's typically made from either a coal tar or a petroleum base. And many synthetic fragrances are known endocrine disruptors. And so that's why we talked a lot about endocrine disruptors, because that is what is commonly linked specifically in synthetic fragrances, where you can kind of get into kind of a gray area is now, especially in the last few years, where we've seen a lot around essential oils, which is great in some ways and can be a little bit tough in other ways, because again, there's no real regulatory process behind that. And so what's being marketed as safe in some capacity is also just synthetically made. And so if are going the essential oil route, we can share some resources for what to look for on labels and things like that as well. But that last part there just says, what can I do? and where you can, go fragrance free. And I do too, love when things smell good. I love the smell, especially in the fall, of anything appley or cinnamony or anything like that. So there are resources and ways to, kind of go about that a little bit safely. But if you do live in a home where anybody does have any type of respiratory sensitivity, so asthma or anything like that, really minimizing, fragrance spray you can will be super impactful. But, if you are a big candle person, or if you are a big air freshener, going in that soy-based route, the soy-based wax melts can be definitely a safer alternative. And then, kind of looking in that essential oil route. But I will say that again with a caveat, knowing that you should be looking for what's organic essential oils. I'm sorry. Because those synthetically made ones can be just as harmful as synthetically made fragrances. And so definitely a gray area, definitely, something that can make it hard for the consumer, but I have a resource that we can kind of dive into. So that's what we'll spend these next few minutes diving into a little bit more. And so these are the different solutions and different resources that we have for making a more consumer informed choice. And so all of this information, like I mentioned, is available on our website. And I know we're approaching our hour, so I want to kind of breeze through these a little bit, but we have a whole DIY, recipe, different things that you can think about in your home. And so what I will say that I included here is, especially in the last 18 months when, we're thinking about keeping our spaces disinfected and really, thinking about those high touch areas where we want to be, a little bit more diligent around how we're cleaning and disinfecting those spaces. And so I do want to say that there is a difference between cleaning and disinfecting. Cleaning is using soap and water and removing dirt, whereas disinfecting is going about it in a way where you've cleaned a surface and then you want to kill specific germs and bacteria that are living on that surface. And so you use those in different areas. And so you don't always need to disinfect every space, but in those high touch areas and in your kitchen where you're preparing any type of meat or any meals and things like that, those are definitely spaces where you'll want to think about disinfecting and where you should be disinfecting. And there are safer alternatives than, some of the products we see on the shelves. And so, maybe making that switch in the next time your bottle runs out from a bleach-based disinfectant to a peroxide-based disinfectant. And that's actually what most hospitals use. They use peroxide-based cleaners because peroxide is super effective, but does not have that harsh chemical smell like bleach. And so is better specifically if you do have someone in your home that is sensitive to any type of, fragrance or any type of really strong smell or chemical. And so peroxide is a really good alternative, just as effective, sorry, as well as alcohol. So anything above that 60 to 70% in alcohol, rubbing alcohol, is also super effective. So Purell, most Lysol brands, Clorox even now, they all have peroxide-based cleaners, and some even do have alcohol-based cleaners as well. So thinking about those different alternatives can be super helpful, especially if you are trying to improve your indoor air quality. And then as well as, in those areas where you don't need to be disinfecting, included in the kit that Annie has for everybody that we put together is what we give the steps to make your own all-purpose cleaner. And so that's literally just half vinegar, half water. And we have a spray bottle in the buckets as well. And that is honestly super effective on really any surface, that you're just kind of cleaning. You're not really treating to disinfect. Vinegar won't kill germs, but it will remove dirt. I'm sorry. And so that can be a super effective all-purpose cleaner, as well as most people use vinegar on, hardwood. It's really, that's kind of been tried and true for a really long time. And so that's included in there as well as a microfiber cloth. And so microfiber cloths actually have the ability to pick up dirt rather than in some capacity, if you're wiping down. Really, if you're using kind of an old rag, you're really just kind of moving dirt. And so if you're using a microfiber cloth or a fresh paper towel every time, you're actually picking up the dirt. And so we've included that in there as well. And baking soda. Baking soda has been used all the time for many, many, many decades, especially in the bathroom. Can be really, really helpful if you're dealing with a drain issue or you are dealing with, any type of soap scum or anything like that. There's a lot of recipes in here for those types of cleaning products in here as well. And that's all stuff that's included in the kit, but also stuff you probably have in your pantry. And so that's available on our website. Something that I do want to make sure I plug is what's called the Through the Environmental Working Group. So that's EWG here. And they have a lot of great resources, but two that we really do point people to. And one is their Skin Deep database. And so this is an app where you could do it on your web browser. And you basically can go in, if you're at the store, you can scan, it's a completely free app. You can scan a product. It will go to that product and it basically gives it a rating. And so that's based on the ingredients that are disclosed. And it'll give you in the personal care products, it's kind of an A through F. And then in the in the cleaning products, it's like a 1 through 10. And so it will give that a rating and it'll tell you why it got a certain rating. So it'll plug or pull out different active ingredients and why those are maybe potentially harmful, what they're linked to, if they're known irritants, if they're known carcinogens, and those types of that type of information. And it's a really helpful tool, especially if you're in the store and you're like, okay, maybe, you know, my shampoo's out, I'm going to try something different. It's a really helpful tool. You can scan a few things. And then they also have what's called EWG verified. And so that means that that product has met a certain standard through the environmental working group, that it got that kind of seal of approval. And so this is a national environmental nonprofit, and they have created this database, and it's really great. And so again, this is the same type of thing, but this is more around the cleaning products. And so, like I said, they're two different databases, but you can access them both through the app or through their web browser. And then we have a DIY cleaning guide, and they have one too. It's just a little bit more extensive. And so it's like 15 pages long. So I don't include the whole thing here, but I do have the link here as well. And then this is also available on our website. And this is kind of if you're ever like, oh man, I need to think about this room, or what's one thing I can do in this space today. We created this kind of bigger infographic. This is made to actually be a poster. It's definitely hard to read in this size. But we created this to kind of say, okay, you know, I can start in my living room today, maybe my bathroom in a few weeks, something I can do super small and easy in this space here today. And so this kind of looks at it from a holistic view. So looking at it as an actual home and the different spaces that we can start thinking about, you know, the different environmental hazards and pollutants that we can start reducing. And so I do want to make sure that I preface all of this to say that, you know, it's not our fault that we don't have a consumer friendly market, and it's not our fault that there's materials that are on our shelves that are potentially harmful. And so while we're, you know, giving you tools and, you know, leaving here today with some small things we can do in terms of green cleaning, or, you know, next time I buy my mascara, that I'm going to maybe look for something different. We want to make sure that we recognize that these are definitely bigger policy issues that, you know, we're working on both at a local level and at a national level. And so creating a more consumer friendly market would help us avoid a lot of these, you know, issues. And so that's definitely the end goal. But for now, you know, we want to make sure we leave here with some next steps. Oh, sorry. And then these are those more specific, like general healthy homes resources, specifically if you're dealing with, you know, lead or want to get linked to some remediation or legal issue or legal resources. And so I've included those here. But again, this is also all available on our website. And one last plug I'm going to make is that right now we do have a completely free resource for Allegheny County residents that if you live or rent in a home built before 1978, we can get you connected to a completely free lead risk assessment. So it will assess for all sources of lead in the home, including paint, dust, water, and soil. And so the link is included there, but I'll also include this all in a follow-up that Annie's going to send out with all of these links to all of these things and all these resources that we've covered today. But I did want to make one plug for that because it is something that we have right now and it is grant funded. So take advantage of it while we can. And that is it. And I know that was a lot of information, and I know we have a few minutes left. And so I'll kind of wrap up there, but let me check the chat here. Okay, Annie, good question. Are there any glue traps that can help get rid of the source, or is it more than just trapping them? I know there are borax sugar chicks to get rid of ant nests. Yeah, okay, that's a really good question, Annie. And so the thing about that is that yes, you can definitely do things like that in a easy way. So, you know, even with fruit flies, you know, the whole put a little bit of apple cider vinegar and Dawn dish soap in a little cup. That's super helpful because they're attracted to the scent and then they kind of get stuck in the Dawn dish soap. Those are all really great tools and can be found on the IPM website as well. The only caveat I would put out is that sometimes with the sugar bait or any bait, really, you can sometimes, depending on what you're dealing with, if it's an ant, you can sometimes attract more bugs than you would have been dealing with without a bait. And so in some ways, or depending on the insect that you're trying to kind of get rid of. In some ways, the bait can actually attract more than what you would originally be dealing with. And so I would point you to the Penn State IPM website, only because, ants are a little bit trickier, but, you wouldn't really want to put a bait out for cockroaches or anything like that, because they honestly, they can smell from like kind of far away. And so certain baits, can actually make your problem a little bit worse. But the glue traps are super effective, especially if you know where your problem area is. You put them right next there. Honestly, when I moved into my apartment, there's like this random like 2-inch hole from my basement to my living room. And I was like, what the heck? And I put a trap there. I didn't even know I was dealing with anything. I put a trap there just to see, and I got a few things. So I was glad I did it. But they don't have baits. And so they're non-toxic, especially if you have a pet that you'd be concerned about. I'm so sorry. Is there any other questions? I think that was the last one in the chat.
I had a question about mold.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you guys do anything, any education on mold in attics?
That's a good question. And so typically it's really hard because, with radon, there's a certain certification that mitigators have to have through the EPA, same with lead, same with asbestos. But unfortunately with mold, there's no like federal training requirement. And so it's kind of hard to find, contractors that know that space super well and know the more, non-toxic routes of dealing with it. And so, in attics, it's not so much, it's definitely a moisture issue, but a lot of it too can be like a temperature issue, especially in, the summer months where you might be dealing with like really high heats in attics. And so in that way, a lot of it is, where you can thermally controlling. And then in other ways it is kind of, this is like not the most ideal thing to do, but adding another humidifier in your attic, which can be helpful. But, when it comes to like roofs and things like that, where you're kind of, those are, and this is again, not the best answer. A lot of those solutions are pretty expensive. Most of the time you're going to end up having to replace either parts of the ceiling or parts of where the drywall are, or the, wherever your fittings are. You typically are going to end up having to replace those if it's something or on a space that you can't completely remove the mold from. So that's a really vague answer to say that, we are connected. We do work with a few different firms locally that we know of that have pretty extensive knowledge in mold that we tend to point people to. So that's not something we do. We don't do mold removal, but we can get people connected to the contractors that can do that the right way.
So I don't know if you guys are connected to attic experts, but
Okay.
So ventilation in an attic is key to keeping out
right
mold. And so a lot of times if people don't have adequate ventilation from either putting up too much insulation, which sounds silly, but sometimes that can cause a problem,
right
or having their fan from their bathroom. So many people don't have it adequately vented to the outside, and actually putting a fan in on your roof is relatively inexpensive. Depending on the roofer, it can be anywhere from $50 to $100, and it can, in the long run, really benefit not only your attic and the mold, but also help with the prolonging your shingles on your roof.
Mm-hmm.
We had it wasn't mold, it was another contaminant. It was actually wood smoke that was contaminating our attic. We had to get all of the insulation remediated. And when we talked to the insurance company, who was actually really instrumental in giving us a lot of education on our attic, they had some really great information on how to make sure that your attic stays healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there are people out there that like specialize in attic health.
Yeah.
Seems like a weird thing about, but honestly, like, if your attic is not healthy, then the rooms below it are also going to be impacted. That's what we were dealing with wood smoke. But you can paint it to get rid of the mold with this funky paint. But ultimately, it's like all about airflow.
Right. No, that's a really good point, and that's actually we just run a call with people that are doing this type of work in Philly, and that was something that they had just said in terms of just putting in basic ductwork from different areas of the home can drastically impact, especially, they were talking more specifically around like dryer vents and things like that. But I mean, yeah, definitely. So very good point. And honestly, if you have a contact there, I would love to kind of pick their brain and see if there's somebody we can point people to, because mold is something we're always trying to help people get resources for.
I'll have to look because it was several years ago. I want to say like years ago, but having when we have what our house was like built in the 50s, 60s,
right?
Nothing was vented. Nothing. Right. Like we had one fan in one bathroom that was not vented. It was in the attic, and our air return, like in the kitchen, we had a vent in the kitchen, and it was not.
So, oh man, did you have a gas stove?
It was no, it was an electric stove.
Okay, at least that's okay a little bit, but
yeah, right. But like we pulled it out and there was like grease line. It was so gross, like lining the inside cavity. It was so gross.
But you're not the only one, I'm sure, who's dealt with that. And so that's a really good thing to at least a resource that, people have the craziest things that they're dealing with in their homes. And that's something that definitely will add to our radar, because I haven't heard of them, which is really cool.
And I did put a link in the chat. So
cool. Thank you.
Just started a Radon program. We're already booked through October. So
that's awesome.
And it's free. We only have 11 monitors, but we're writing a grant to get more. And we're hoping to start a radon lending library for across Pennsylvania with Physicians for Social Responsibility. We're really hoping to get a grant to get like hundreds of monitors and give libraries monitors, and so people can check out radon monitors, and they're really cool. They're these eco cubes, but
are they the digital ones? They're not the ones you have to.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We can like see the and I also so you mentioned like weather, rain is really instrumental in putting radon in your home.
Right.
One of the biggest, like when we see spikes in radon levels in homes and offices, it's because of rain usually. So
nope, that's a good point, and you're absolutely right. All right, well, I know we're a little bit over, so I don't want to keep anybody. I want to be respectful of time, but thank you, Jillian, that was awesome. I feel like you could have done this. But if you have any other questions, my contact info is there. I am going to share all of the live links with Annie that she's going to send out in a follow-up email. And honestly, we covered a lot of information, and there's a lot of resources that I probably didn't even get to mention. And so, if you're dealing with or know somebody who's dealing with any kind of unique situation, please feel free to connect them to me. If we don't have the resource, we definitely can get them connected to somebody who does. So thank you guys. And thank you for letting me take a little bit of your time tonight. And I think